The morning mist was thick and heavy over the sprawling hills of Montana. Frost clung to every blade of grass, and the crisp air hinted that winter was quickly approaching. Michael's old pickup truck groaned as it crawled up the gravel road, its headlights cutting through the fog. In the distance, David's ranch slowly emerged from the haze. A place that once brimmed with life now felt eerily quiet. David stood by the worn wooden fence, his posture rigid but his eyes weary. Years of service as a police officer had carved the lines of experience into his face, but today it was sorrow that weighed on him. Beside him, standing tall and unmoving, was Storm. The dark brown horse seemed to mirror David's solemnity, watching Michael with an intelligence that felt unnervingly human. Michael cut the engine and stepped out into the cold, his boots crunching against the frosted ground. He hesitated for a moment, taking in the sight before him. "Are you sure about this, David?" he asked quietly, his breath forming clouds in the air. David sighed, running a gloved hand along Storm's sleek neck. "I don't have a choice, Michael. The bills won't stop coming, and I can't give him what he needs anymore." His voice cracked. "But with you, he'll have a good home." Michael approached cautiously. Storm didn't flinch. Instead, he stared back, tilting his head as if assessing him. Michael felt a strange chill that had nothing to do with the cold. This was no ordinary horse. The sale was swift but heavy with emotion. Papers were signed with reluctant hands, and as Michael prepared to lead Storm into the trailer, David leaned in, whispering something into the horse's ear. Storm didn't move, didn't flinch. He just listened. The drive home was quiet. Michael glanced into the rearview mirror, catching glimpses of Storm standing steadily in the trailer. A gnawing thought pressed in. What exactly had David whispered? Arriving at the ranch, Michael was met with the reactions he had anticipated. Emma squealed with joy, rushing to the trailer, while Ben hung back, eyes wide with curiosity. Sarah stood on the porch, arms crossed but a soft smile betraying her hesitation. "He's enormous," Emma gasped, reaching for the latch. "Easy now," Michael warned, though his voice softened when Storm stepped down calmly, lowering his head toward Emma. The horse's gentleness was unexpected, yet natural. Later that night, after settling Storm in the stable, Michael noticed something unsettling. Storm remained alert, ears twitching at every distant sound. His eyes darted around, scanning the shadows. Michael rubbed his own arms against the cold. "Just settling in, right?" he muttered. But deep inside, he wondered if something deeper was stirring. Days passed, but Storm's tense behavior only grew more pronounced. Every rustling branch, every distant creak of the wooden barn seemed to put him on edge. His ears would twitch at the faintest sound, and he would frequently pace his stall, scanning the environment as if anticipating an unseen threat. It was Sarah who first voiced the growing concern. "Michael, this isn't normal," Sarah said one chilly morning as she poured coffee. "He's too alert, too aware. Don't you think it's strange?" Michael leaned on the kitchen counter, staring out the frosted window toward the stable. Storm was there, standing tall, eyes fixated on the tree line. "Maybe he's still adjusting, new surroundings and all," Michael replied, though doubt had already begun to creep into his mind. That afternoon, as Michael tended to the fields, the sound of hurried footsteps on the gravel driveway caught his attention. It was their neighbor, Mr. Thompson, his face flushed from the cold and urgency. "Michael, we need to talk," Mr. Thompson panted. "More thefts have happened, tools, livestock. People are saying it's a gang, and they're getting bolder." Michael's grip on the fence tightened. Their quiet Montana community wasn't the kind of place where organized thefts happened. Storm, who had been grazing nearby, suddenly lifted his head, ears pricked forward. He let out a low, unsettling whinny. Michael turned, noticing Storm's unwavering gaze toward the distant woods. "Storm's been acting strange since he arrived. Maybe he senses something we don't," Michael admitted, more to himself than to Thompson. Mr. Thompson nodded grimly. "Animals have instincts we don't. You'd better stay alert." That night, Michael couldn't sleep. He stood by the window, watching Storm in the stable. The horse remained rigid, staring toward the darkened woods, occasionally shifting his weight as though preparing to move. The following days only deepened Michael's concern. Strange tire tracks appeared near the barn, ones Michael didn't recognize. Tools had been slightly displaced, as if someone had rummaged through them. Nothing was missing yet, but it felt like someone had been there, watching. Storm's unease grew. He paced his paddock, snorting and stomping, reacting to sounds Michael couldn't hear. Emma noticed too. "Dad, Storm keeps staring at the woods. Is something out there?" she asked one afternoon while brushing the horse. Michael knelt beside her, placing a steady hand on Storm's strong neck. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I think he's trying to tell us something." By the end of the week, more neighbors reported thefts. Barn doors found open, missing equipment, and even livestock disappearing without a trace. Fear began to ripple through the small community. During a late-night conversation over coffee, Sarah leaned closer. "Do you think this could be connected to Storm? Maybe. Whoever's behind this knows him." Michael's mind flashed back to David's reluctance, the whispered words to Storm before the sale. What exactly had David trained Storm for? Storm, still vigilant, pawed at the ground. Michael sighed. "Maybe it's time I talked to David again." The next morning, Michael wasted no time. He called David, urgency lacing his voice. "David, it's Michael. Storm's been acting strange. More thefts are happening around here. I need to know, was there something you didn't tell me about him?" David was silent for a moment. Then, with a sigh, he replied, "Storm wasn't just any police horse. He was specially trained for surveillance and security detail, especially in rural environments. He can detect intruders before humans even sense danger." Michael's stomach tightened. "Why didn't you tell me this before? I thought you'd never need to know, but now it seems like you do." "Be careful, Michael. If Storm is on edge, something's wrong." Michael hung up, his mind racing. Storm wasn't just sensing danger, he was responding to it, and Michael needed to be ready. That evening, while checking the barn, Michael noticed Storm pacing more aggressively, eyes locked on the tree line. Suddenly, the horse stopped, muscles tensing. Michael followed his gaze and spotted movement, shadows slipping between the trees. Heart pounding, Michael grabbed his rifle and quietly stepped outside. Storm snorted and pawed the ground but stayed silent, as if understanding the need for stealth. Michael crept closer to the woods, careful not to make a sound. Through the dense fog, he saw them. 3 figures, dressed in dark clothes, moving toward the barn. One of them carried a crowbar. Without hesitation, Storm let out a thunderous neigh, shattering the silence. The intruders froze. Michael fired a warning shot into the air. "Get off my land!" he roared. The men bolted into the shadows, disappearing into the woods. Michael returned to Storm, adrenaline still surging. He patted the horse's neck. "Good boy, you knew." But Michael also knew this wasn't over. They would be back, and next time, they might be prepared. The next day, Michael gathered the neighbors. They formed a patrol group, rotating shifts to watch over the farms. Storm led the nightly patrols, his instincts guiding them to suspicious areas. Yet the danger escalated. That same week, David called again, his tone grim. "Michael, I dug into this gang. Their leader, Ken Murphy, used to be connected to law enforcement. He knows how to evade detection, and he'll stop at nothing to get what he wants." Michael tightened his grip on the phone. What does he want with Storm? He knows what Storm can do, and that terrifies him. That night, Michael stood by Storm in the cold, the moon casting eerie shadows across the farm. Storm stared into the distance, nostrils flaring. Michael whispered, "Whatever comes, we face it together." The night was unnervingly still. A thick fog clung to the ground, wrapping the Montana Valley in a suffocating silence. Michael paced the porch, his rifle resting against the wall, while Storm stood motionless in the paddock. The horse's ears were pricked forward, his body rigid. He sensed something. So did Michael. The stillness shattered when Storm let out a deep, guttural snort. Michael followed his gaze toward the woods. There, barely visible through the fog, were faint, flickering lights. Flashlights. Michael's pulse quickened. Without hesitation, he grabbed his rifle and headed toward the barn, signaling to Storm. The horse moved silently alongside him, every muscle taut and ready. Then the shadows emerged. Figures cloaked in dark clothing, moving with practiced silence. They were more organized this time. Michael counted 5 men. One of them, larger and more commanding, hung back, watching. Michael didn't need a second guess. Ken Murphy. Ken had come himself. Storm sensed it too. His body trembled, not with fear, but with anticipation. Michael crouched behind the fence, aiming his rifle. He fired a warning shot into the air. The gunshot echoed through the valley. "Leave now, while you still can." Michael's voice thundered in the darkness. But Ken didn't flinch. He raised a hand, and 2 of his men split off, flanking the barn. Storm exploded into motion. With a deafening neigh, he surged forward, charging at the intruders with terrifying speed. His hooves thundered against the frozen ground, a living force of nature. The men panicked. One dropped his flashlight and fled. Another stumbled backward, scrambling to escape the horse's relentless advance. Michael fired another warning shot, this time closer. The rest of the gang bolted, but Ken remained, unmoving. "You can't stop this, Michael," Ken shouted, his voice calm yet venomous. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Michael stepped forward, Storm at his side. "And you have no idea what this horse is capable of." Ken sneered, but slowly backed into the shadows, disappearing into the fog. Moments later, the distant wail of sirens broke the silence. David had kept his promise. The police were closing in. Ken wouldn't escape this time. Storm snorted, pawing the ground as if satisfied. Michael rested a hand on his mane. "You did good, boy, real good." The morning sun broke through the dense fog, casting golden light over the ranch. The eerie silence of the night before had been replaced by the steady hum of activity. Police vehicles lined the dirt road, officers combing the property for evidence. Ken Murphy and his gang were in custody, handcuffed and sullen, their plan to terrorize the community thwarted. Michael stood on the porch, exhaustion weighing heavily on him. Storm stood proudly beside him, his dark coat glistening in the morning light. The horse was calm now, but his eyes remained sharp, watchful. David approached, his face solemn but proud. "You handled this better than I could have imagined," David said, patting Storm's neck. He was trained for situations like this, but it's rare to see him trust someone the way he trusts you. Michael gave a tired but grateful nod. He saved us all. Without him, this could have ended differently. Emma and Ben rushed out onto the porch, their faces beaming with pride. "Storm's a hero, Dad!" Emma exclaimed, wrapping her arms around the horse's strong leg. Sarah followed close behind, a warm smile softening her normally cautious demeanor. "I wasn't sure about him at first," she admitted, "but I see now he's family." News of the failed attack and Storm's heroism spread quickly through the Montana Valley. Neighbors arrived with warm meals and grateful words. The community, once isolated in fear, now stood united, strengthened by their shared ordeal. Inspired by Storm's bravery, Michael and David organized a permanent neighborhood watch. Families took turns patrolling at night, always accompanied by their own animals, trained under Storm's example. Weeks later, the ranch felt safer than ever. Emma and Ben played freely in the open fields, their laughter echoing across the land. Sarah worked in the garden, peace finally settling over their home. David visited often, sometimes staying late into the evening to help with patrol shifts. One afternoon, as he prepared to leave, he turned to Michael. "He's exactly where he belongs," David said quietly. Michael looked out over the ranch, watching Storm graze peacefully. "No, David, he's home." Storm lifted his head, gazing back at Michael, his eyes steady and wise. Whatever darkness had threatened them was gone, but Storm's watchful spirit remained, a silent guardian over the family he had chosen. If Storm's story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heartwarming stories of loyalty and courage.